From the beginning of human civilization, people have always needed to measure things. How far was it to the next settlement? Or how far can a horse travel in a day? And so on. So, how exactly did we start measuring distances? What were the problems with them? And how did we solve it? Let's find out. The early measurement systems developed units that were mostly based on human body. For example, consider the foot, which is approximately the size of an adult foot. For smaller units, we divided the foot into 12 parts and called each one an inch. So an inch is basically a 12th of a foot. For slightly bigger units, we consider something like a yard, which was the length of a man's waist. So clearly, these units are pretty inconsistent because body measurements are not the same for everyone. And moreover, converting from one unit to another was a numerical nightmare. 1 inch is 1/12 of a foot. 1 yard was approximately 3 feet. So guess how many feet are in a mile? Turns out it's about 5,280. Can you see what I mean? It was very hard to convert units. So we really needed a much more standard system. And it was the French who eventually came up with the metric system. This is the system that we use today. The unit of length in the metric system is the meter. The meter comes from the Greek metron, which means to measure, and it's abbreviated as small n. A meter is slightly bigger than a yard. So it's great for measuring things like the dimensions of a house or maybe the length of a tree, or for that matter, the size of a soccer field, which is about roughly 100 meters. But what if you're dealing with something that's very tiny, like the size of a button, or something that's very big, like the distance between two cities, for example? Now the meter becomes too inconvenient. What do we do now? Well, this is where we come up with an ingenious idea. We said, look, let's just use a base unit, in this case, the meter. And then if you want to measure something that's much smaller, we come up with smaller units by dividing the base unit by the powers of 10. And if you want to measure something much bigger, we come up with larger units by multiplying the base unit by the powers of 10. Why 10? Because it's much easier to do the math in our heads. So let's take an example. To build a smaller unit, we'll take the meter and divide it into 10 equal parts. So each part now represents 1/10 of a meter, and we can call that a decimeter, abbreviated as dm. So a decimeter is 1/10 of a meter. It's a meter divided by 10. In fact, the word deci literally stands for dividing by 10. Think about decimal systems. That's what the abbreviation means over here, deci. So how big is a decimeter? It's roughly the width of your hand. So your hand is about a decimeter wide or about 1/10 of a meter wide. Okay, but what if you want even smaller units? Well, now you can take a decimeter and divide that into 10 equal parts. Now think about this. This is 1/10 of a decimeter, which is already a 10th of a meter. So this represents a 10th of a meter, which is 1/100th of a meter. So this is the same as a meter being divided into 100 equal parts. And that's why this small unit now, we call it the centimeter. So a centimeter is 1/100th of a meter. It's a meter divided by 100. And it's about the width of a human nail. And again, think about the prefix over here, centi, which means 1/100th. Think about 1/100th of a dollar, which is a cent. Or when we divide something into 100 equal parts, we talk about percent. Or there are 100 years in a century. Makes sense, right? But what if we want to go even smaller? Well, we'll just keep continuing to do this, right? Now we take a centimeter and divide that into 10 equal parts. Now this represents a 10th of a centimeter, which is 100th of a meter. So this represents 1/10 of a 100th of a meter, which is 1,000th of a meter. And so we call this the millimeter. So a millimeter is 1,000th of a meter, which is roughly the width of the tip of a sharp pencil or the nib of a pen. And this is how, just by using the powers of 10, look, we can build smaller units. In fact, we can build even smaller units if you want. For example, a micrometer is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. This squiggly looking line over here is the Greek letter for M. So we use that for micro. A nanometer, for example, is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And we use small n to represent nanometer, and so on and so forth. And now let's explore the other side. How do we build larger units? Well, for that, let's take our base unit, which is a meter, and multiply it by powers of 10. For example, let's multiply it by 10. Now we get a decameter, which is abbreviated as DAM. The DA stands for deca, which literally means multiplied by 10. So a decameter is 10 times a meter. And this is roughly the size or the length of a school bus. So we have a big unit with us. But what if we want to build an even bigger unit? Well, let's continue the same thing. Let's take our decameter and multiply that by 10. What will we get? Well, we'll get 10 times decameter, which is 10 times 10 times a meter. So we're getting a new unit, which is 100 times that of a meter. Does that make sense? 10 times a decameter or 100 times a meter. We call this a hectometer, which is abbreviated as HM, small hm. So a hectometer is 100 times bigger than meter. It's 100 times a meter. The hectometer is roughly the length of a soccer field. This is a huge unit, but why stop there? Let's go even bigger. So let's take the hectometer and multiply that by 10. That will be 10 times 100 times meter, which is 1,000 times meter. We call that the kilometer. The prefix kilo stands for 1,000 times something, and it's abbreviated as small km. So a kilometer is 1,000 meters. And now we have a unit that's big enough and you're familiar with, and we use that to measure distance between cities, for example. And there we have it. This is how we build larger units, by multiplying our base unit by the powers of 10. And again, we don't have to stop there. We can just keep building larger and larger units like this by multiplying with bigger and bigger powers of 10. So putting it all together, the beauty of metric system is to start with the base unit and then come up with smaller or larger units by dividing or multiplying by the powers of 10. For example, 100th is a centimeter, 1 millionth is a micrometer. And if you want larger units, for example, we can multiply by 1,000, giving us a kilometer. And we represent these smaller or bigger units by the appropriate prefixes and the appropriate abbreviations.